Welcome to these gentle, soothing stories for sleep. I'm so glad you are here. Whether you are preparing to drift off to sleep, relaxing after a long day, or simply seeking a quiet companion, you've come to the right place. Tonight, we will begin a journey of profound imagination, exploring a world both familiar and utterly alien. We will ask the question, what would the world be like with only 100 people left? Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, or how your day was. Please leave a comment below. Wherever you are, I hope you are feeling comfortable, relaxed, and ready to explore something gentle yet extraordinary. And if you find these soothing scientific journeys interesting, pleasant, or even just wonderfully weird, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more souls who are searching for peace find their way here. Imagine waking up, not to the familiar chime of an alarm or the distant rumble of the day's first train, but to a silence so deep and so absolute that it seems to have a sound of its own. It is a low, resonant hum, the sound of the world's machinery having finally ground to a halt, the sound of 8 billion human breaths no longer stirring the air. This is the first sensation in a world with only 100 people, a great and profound stillness that settles over everything, like a blanket of fresh snow. You might lie there for a moment, letting this new quiet seep into your bones, trying to place what is different. It is not just the absence of noise, but the presence of a vast, tranquil emptiness. The familiar soundtrack of our civilization, the constant, low-frequency hum of traffic, the whisper of air conditioning units, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog, the faint cry of a siren on the far edge of hearing, it has all vanished. In its place, sounds that were once completely masked can now emerge with a startling clarity. You can hear the gentle sigh of the wind as it navigates the concrete canyons of a deserted city, creating strange, melodic flutes as it passes through the gaps in empty window frames. You might hear the rhythmic creak of a single traffic light swaying back and forth on its cable, a lonely metronome marking a time that no longer needs to be kept. The rustle of a plastic bag caught on a tree branch becomes a loud and percussive event in this new auditory landscape. This phenomenon is something acousticians call the soundscape, the total collection of sounds in a given environment, and it is made of 3 parts. The geophony, which is the sound of the earth itself, like wind and rain; the biophony, the sounds of living creatures, like birdsong and the chirping of crickets; and the anthropophony, which is the world of human-made sound. For centuries, the anthropophony has been a deafening roar, drowning out almost everything else. Its sudden absence would be like listening to a grand symphony orchestra where the entire brass and percussion section, playing at full volume for 100 years, abruptly falls silent. For the first time, you can hear the delicate, intricate melodies of the woodwinds and strings, the soft notes of the planet itself that were always there, but were simply unheard beneath our clamour. The song of a sparrow, once lost in the noise of a city morning, would now echo between buildings with the purity of a cathedral choir. The psychological effect of this would be immense. Our brains have evolved a remarkable skill called auditory habituation, a form of selective hearing that allows us to filter out constant, predictable background noise so we can focus on what is important. We don't consciously hear the refrigerator's hum or the drone of highway traffic, because our minds have learned to classify it as irrelevant information. When that constant drone disappears entirely, the brain can experience a form of sensory shock. It is suddenly straining to hear a sound that is no longer there, a state of heightened awareness that can feel both deeply peaceful and strangely unsettling. And this new world would not just sound different, it would look different, especially at night. Imagine standing in the heart of what was once Times Square or Piccadilly Circus. But the screens are all black, the buildings are dark silhouettes against the sky, and the only light comes from the moon and the stars. We have lived for generations under a perpetual twilight of our own making, a phenomenon known as sky glow. The countless streetlights, office windows, and illuminated signs of our cities cast their light upwards, where it strikes dust particles, water vapor, and aerosols in the atmosphere, scattering in every direction and creating a diffuse, orange-tinted haze that blots out the cosmos. It's like trying to see a single, delicate candle flame in the middle of a brightly lit stadium. The faint light of the distant stars simply cannot compete. With the global power grid having failed, this artificial glow would vanish in an instant. The darkness that would descend upon the cities would be deeper than any living person has ever experienced. And out of that darkness, the true night sky would be reborn. The Milky Way, our own galaxy, a shimmering river of billions of suns that most of humanity has only ever seen in photographs, would stretch from horizon to horizon. It would be visible not just from remote deserts, but from the center of Paris, from the quiet streets of Tokyo, from a rooftop in Manhattan. The sheer number of stars would be overwhelming, a glittering, diamond dust tapestry that would seem close enough to touch. This primordial view, the same one our distant ancestors looked upon with awe and wonder, would return to us. It is a humbling sight, a powerful reminder of our place in the universe. Silence is not an emptiness after all. It is a presence. It is the vast, dark canvas upon which the universe paints its true sounds and its most spectacular light. For our entire history, we have been shouting into the void, filling the quiet with our own importance. But what if the quiet, all this time, was patiently waiting to show us something magnificent? This new clarity of sound and light is only the first change, the overture to a much grander transformation. For the very air we breathe, the invisible ocean in which we live, would begin a slow and steady process of purification, carrying with it new scents, a different weight, and a color that the world had almost forgotten. Can you remember the last time you took a deep breath and tasted nothing but the air itself? Not the faint, metallic tang of traffic fumes, or the dusty haze of a hot summer city, but just the clean, crisp essence of oxygen and nitrogen, perhaps carrying the scent of rain or the fragrance of distant pine trees. In the world after the great stillness, this would become the new reality. The air itself would undergo a profound cleansing. Imagine standing on a balcony overlooking a city that has been silent for a year. The familiar grey or brownish haze that once clung to the horizon has vanished, replaced by a sky of such a sharp and impossible blue that it almost hurts to look at. The view is clearer than you have ever seen it. Distant hills and buildings, once blurry smudges, are now rendered in perfect, crisp detail. The scents on the breeze have changed too. The dominant smell is no longer asphalt and exhaust, but the earthy fragrance of damp concrete, the subtle perfume of moss beginning its slow conquest of the stone, and the sweet aroma of wildflowers, carried on the wind from a park that is beginning its transformation into a wild meadow. This is the tangible result of the planet's atmosphere beginning to heal itself, a process that would start with astonishing speed. Much of the visible air pollution in our cities is made of tiny, invisible particles called aerosols and particulate matter, especially the infamous PM 2.5, particles so small they can lodge deep within our lungs. Think of them as a kind of global dust, countless microscopic motes of soot, chemicals, and earth, kicked up by our factories, power plants, and vehicles, constantly dancing in the sunbeams of our world. With the engines of industry shut down, the vast majority of these particles would no longer be pumped into the sky. The atmosphere would then begin its own housekeeping through a process called atmospheric deposition. Gravity would gently pull some particles down, but the real cleansing would come with the rain. Every raindrop forms around a tiny nucleus, often a particle of dust or pollution. As it falls, it scrubs the air, collecting more particles on its way down. The rains in the first few months would literally wash the sky clean, returning trillions of these tiny man-made motes to the surface of the earth, where they would be absorbed into the soil and the oceans. Alongside this, certain pollutant gases would disappear with remarkable swiftness. Nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, is a major component of smog and a primary byproduct of burning fossil fuels in our car engines. It has a very short atmospheric lifetime, typically only about a day before it is broken down by sunlight or washed out by rain. Cities would see their air quality improve dramatically, almost overnight, as the brownish tint of nitrogen dioxide pollution faded from the sky. This newly pristine air would have a beautiful effect on the light that passes through it. The reason our sky is blue is due to a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering. The molecules of nitrogen and oxygen in the air are the perfect size to scatter the shorter, blue wavelengths of light from the sun more effectively than the longer, red wavelengths. When the air is full of larger particles, like soot and dust, another type of scattering occurs, called Mie scattering, which scatters all wavelengths of light more equally. This is what makes a polluted sky look hazy and pale, a washed-out, whitish blue. As the particulate matter falls out of the air, Mie scattering would decrease significantly, allowing the beautiful, deep blue of Rayleigh scattering to dominate once more. Sunsets and sunrises would also change their character. The fiery, spectacular reds and oranges we often associate with a beautiful sunset are frequently enhanced by pollution particles, which scatter away the blue light and allow the red light to pass through to our eyes when the sun is low on the horizon. In a cleaner world, sunsets would be softer, painted in more subtle hues of yellow, pink, and gentle orange, a more delicate and serene end to the day. We so often think of the sky as a vast, unchanging dome above our heads, a simple backdrop to our lives. But it is not. It is a dynamic, churning ocean of gases, a complex and sensitive system that carries the memory of every fire we have ever lit and every engine we have ever run. To see it clear again would be to witness a planetary memory being wiped clean, a fresh canvas being prepared, offering the world a chance to breathe again. And as this clear air settles and the world grows quiet, another, far more patient and powerful force would begin to stir, a relentless energy that has been held in check for centuries. The planet's true architects, the silent, green engine of life itself, would begin to reclaim their dominion, not with a roar, but with the unstoppable push of a single, tender shoot. Have you ever stopped to admire a single, defiant dandelion pushing its way through a tiny crack in the pavement? It is a small, quiet testament to the relentless power of life. Now, try to imagine that same patient, indomitable force multiplied by 1 billion, and then 1 billion again, working in unison across every road, every car park, every forgotten tennis court and city square on the entire planet. This is the beginning of the green tide, the slow, silent, and unstoppable process of nature, reclaiming the world we built. Within just a few years, the change would be unmistakable. The sharp, clean lines of our architecture would begin to soften and blur. A fine green fuzz of moss and algae would coat the shaded sides of skyscrapers, while tenacious weeds with names like buddleia, the butterfly bush, would take root on window ledges, 50 stories high, their seeds delivered by the wind. The perfectly manicured lawns of suburbia would surrender to a riot of wildflowers and tall grasses, buzzing with a renewed insect population. The asphalt of our vast road networks, our proudest arteries of commerce, would become the front line of this green invasion. Small cracks, formed by the subtle shifting of the earth and the cycle of freezing and thawing, would become footholds for pioneer plants. Their roots, seeking water and nutrients, would push deeper, widening the cracks with a slow, hydraulic pressure that can eventually shatter stone. This process is a fundamental principle of biology known as ecological succession. It is the orderly and predictable sequence of changes in an ecosystem over time. You can think of our abandoned world as a vast, empty canvas that nature is beginning to paint upon. The first artists to arrive are the pioneer species. These are the hardy, scrappy organisms, the dandelions and grasses, the mosses and lichens. They are specialists in survival, capable of thriving in the harshest conditions, like the nutrient-poor, sun-baked surface of a concrete plaza. They are nature's demolition and renovation crew. Their roots break apart our foundations, and as they live and die, their decomposing bodies create the very first, thin layer of organic soil. They are terraformers, patiently preparing the ground for those who will come after. Once they have created a slightly more hospitable environment, the next wave of colonists arrives. These are the larger shrubs and the fast-growing, sun-loving trees like birches, alders, and poplars. Their seeds, light enough to be carried for miles on the wind, would find purchase in the new soil, accumulating in the cracks of our cities. Within a few decades, a suburban street could begin to look like a dense thicket, the houses peeking out from a sea of green. This new, young forest would then create a shaded, damp microclimate on the forest floor, an environment unsuitable for its own seedlings, but perfect for the final stage of succession. This is when the great, slow-growing, shade-tolerant trees would arrive. The oaks, the maples, the beeches. These are the climax species, the final, masterful brushstrokes on nature's canvas. Over the course of a century or two, they would grow tall and broad, their dense canopies blocking out the sun, eventually replacing the pioneer trees that came before them. The city would become a true forest, its floor a rich carpet of leaf litter, its topography defined not by streets and avenues, but by the rusting skeletons of buildings, now draped in ivy and crowned with trees. We built our cities as monuments to our own sense of permanence, crafting them from stone and steel and concrete, materials we believed would last forever. But we have always misunderstood the nature of permanence. In the grand scheme of the planet, permanence is not found in static, rigid resistance to change. It is found in the constant, flowing, and relentless process of adaptation and renewal. The green tide is not an invasion of our world. It is the world's own lifeblood, its own ancient rhythm, returning to the places from which it was briefly displaced. It is a homecoming, and this rising, verdant tide would not go unnoticed. For the countless other creatures who shared our planet, but for so long had lived in the shrinking shadows of our world, this explosive return of the green would signal the dawn of a new and much wilder age. What does a city sound like when the mournful howl of a wolf echoes where the siren of an ambulance once wailed? This is the sound of the second great reclamation, the resurgence of the animal kingdom into the territories we once called exclusively our own. As the green tide softens the edges of our world, creating new habitats and abundant food sources, the animals would follow. At first, it would be the smaller, more adaptable creatures. Raccoons, foxes, and rats, already skilled urban survivors, would thrive. But soon, larger and shy wild animals would begin to venture out from their refuges in our parks and nature reserves. Imagine a herd of white-tailed deer stepping delicately through the silent, rusting taxis of a deserted Times Square. Their graceful forms a stark contrast to the dark, useless billboards above them. Picture a black bear, driven by curiosity and an incredible sense of smell, wandering through the open door of a suburban house, sniffing with bemused confusion at the long empty cupboards in a spacious kitchen. Look up at the sky and see it filled with vast, shifting patterns of birds, their ancient migratory paths now clear and unobstructed, no longer confused by the disorienting glow of our city lights or the lethal obstacle course of our glass towers. One of the most profound impacts we had on the animal world was habitat fragmentation. Our roads, our railways, our fences, and our cities themselves acted as immense, impenetrable barriers, chopping up the natural landscape into smaller and smaller isolated pockets. For animals, this was like living in a house where all the doors were locked. It limited their ability to find food, to find mates, and to escape threats. You could imagine the natural world as a single, beautiful, intricate mosaic, and we shattered it into 1,000 disconnected pieces. In a world with only 100 people, these barriers would effectively dissolve. A highway would no longer be a deadly river of steel, but simply a strange, open clearing in the new forest, a convenient pathway for a roaming moose. This newfound freedom of movement would be a lifeline for countless species, allowing populations to reconnect, strengthening their genetic diversity, and making them more resilient. This reconnection would set the stage for one of nature's most dramatic phenomena, the trophic cascade. With vegetation running rampant, the populations of herbivores, the plant eaters like rabbits, deer, and wild boar would explode. This immense buffet would, in turn, attract their predators. Wolves, cougars, bears, and other top carnivores, whose territories we had pushed to the absolute margins, would follow their food source, moving down from the mountains and out of the deep forests to reclaim their ancestral hunting grounds, which now happen to include the overgrown ruins of our towns and cities. The presence of these apex predators would fundamentally reshape the new ecosystem, just as the reintroduction of wolves famously did in Yellowstone National Park. Their hunting patterns would keep the herbivore populations in check, preventing them from overgrazing and allowing different kinds of vegetation to flourish, which in turn would create new habitats for birds and beavers, which in turn would change the very shape of the rivers. But what of the billions of animals we created for our own use? Our domesticated creatures. For most of them, the end would be swift and tragic. Chickens, penned in their millions, and cattle, unable to fend for themselves, would perish quickly without human care. But some would prove far more adaptable. Herds of sheep might be guided by a few hardy pack dogs, forming a new and strange symbiotic relationship. Domestic cats, natural and efficient predators, would thrive, perhaps becoming a new and formidable predator for local bird populations. And some of our most common farm animals, like pigs, would undergo a remarkable transformation. A domestic pig can revert to a wild, or feral, state with astonishing speed. Within just a few months, it will grow a coat of coarse hair, and if it is a male, it will begin to grow formidable tusks. Over a few generations, these escaped farm pigs would become indistinguishable from the wild boars of ancient European forests. We like to call them wild animals, as if their nature was something separate and alien to the orderly world we had constructed. But standing in the ruins of our civilization, watching a pack of wolves trot silently down a deserted Michigan avenue, you would be forced to wonder. Perhaps it was our world that was the brief anomaly, a loud, bright, and fleeting interruption in a much older, wilder, and more enduring story. And as the animal kingdom finds its new, fierce balance, a much quieter revolution would be taking place on a microscopic scale, a silent battle of chemistry and biology that would ultimately determine the fate of every single thing we ever built. If a skyscraper falls in an empty city and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer, of course, is yes. It makes a final, deafening roar. But that catastrophic sound is preceded by a century of whispers, the quiet, tireless, and cumulative sounds of decay. It is the gentle patter of a single water leak, the faint groan of stressed metal, the soft sloughing of a piece of concrete giving way to a root. This is the next chapter of the world's story. The slow, graceful, and inexorable decay of all our works. Imagine walking through a great museum, decades after the last visitor has left. The priceless paintings, masterpieces of human expression, begin to surrender. The canvas slackens. The paint, deprived of a climate-controlled environment, flakes away like colourful dust, and a fine web of mildew traces new patterns across the old. Walk to a grand suspension bridge, once a marvel of engineering. Its proud red paint has peeled, revealing the steel beneath, which is now bleeding long, brown-orange trails of rust down its towers. The immense steel cables, each a woven tapestry of thousands of individual wires, would begin to corrode, one tiny strand at a time, until the day one finally snaps with a sound like a rifle shot, then another, and another. This is the patient, relentless chemistry of entropy, the universal tendency for order to dissolve into chaos, and it finds its most powerful accomplice in the gentlest of substances, water. Water is the universal solvent, and it is the primary agent of our world's undoing. It is a patient and persistent locksmith, trying every microscopic crack and fissure, seeking a way into the heart of our structures. When it finds its way into a tiny fracture in a concrete pillar and the temperature drops below freezing, it expands with a force powerful enough to shatter granite, a process called frost wedging. Over countless seasons, this cycle of freezing and thawing turns hairline cracks into gaping wounds. Water also carries dissolved gases, like carbon dioxide, which can form a weak carbonic acid. This acidic rain slowly leaches the calcium compounds that bind our concrete together, causing it to crumble and lose its strength. And everywhere water persists, it brings life algae, lichens, and mosses, whose tiny rootlets secrete acids of their own, further dissolving the surfaces they cling to. It is a slow, collaborative effort, a siege conducted on a microscopic level. The very backbone of our civilization, iron in the form of steel, is in a constant battle against its own nature. Iron is mined from the earth as iron ore, a stable, low-energy compound of iron and oxygen. Through the tremendous heat and energy of a blast furnace, we rip the oxygen away to create pure, strong iron. But this pure state is unnatural and energy-intensive. The iron atoms yearn to return to their relaxed, oxidized state. This natural process of return is what we call rust. Every molecule of iron oxide is a testament to the fact that our paints, coatings, and alloys are nothing more than temporary shields, a way of holding back a chemical imperative that will, eventually, always win. Rust is not a flaw in the metal. It is a homecoming for the atoms. Different materials will surrender to this slow decay at vastly different rates, creating a strange and selective archaeological record. Anything made of wood, from our homes to our furniture, will be among the first to go, consumed by a succession of fungi, termites, and other insects, returning its carbon to the soil. Steel and iron will follow over the course of centuries, dissolving into reddish dust. Concrete, while appearing permanent, will crumble over a similar timescale as its steel-reinforcing bars rust and expand, breaking it apart from the inside out. But some of our creations would be almost immortal. Glass, made from silica, is chemically inert and amorphous in its structure, meaning it can survive for millions of years, its smooth, colourful fragments becoming like new pebbles on the shores of the future. And then there is plastic. The incredibly strong carbon-carbon bonds of our polymers are alien to most of the bacteria and fungi that are responsible for decomposition. They simply do not have the evolutionary toolkit to break them down. Our plastic bottles, bags, and toys will persist for tens of thousands of years, eventually breaking into smaller microparticles, but never truly disappearing. They will become the strange, unnaturally bright fossils of our time. We built our world to last, to project our presence far into the future. But forever is a human concept that nature does not recognize. Our greatest monuments are not eternal statements etched in stone, but temporary whispers against the long, slow, and patient exhalation of the planet. And as our static world crumbles, what of the things we built that were designed to move, to think, to run on their own? The silent, automated guardians of our power, ticking away their last moments in vast concrete tombs. Imagine a world where the last glimmer of electric light on the entire planet comes not from a human hand flipping a switch, but from a machine, deep in the earth, following its final, lonely, pre-programmed command. This is the world of the automated ghosts, the technological echoes of our civilization that would continue to function, for a time, in an empty world. Picture a vast hydroelectric dam, like the Hoover Dam, nestled in a remote canyon. For as long as the river flows and its turbines remain lubricated, it would continue to spin, its generators dutifully producing hundreds of megawatts of power. That electricity would surge into the national grid, a web of cables and transformers stretching across the continent, but it would be a river of energy flowing into an empty lake. There would be no factories to power, no homes to light, no phones to charge. In the deserts of Nevada or the plains of Spain, immense solar farms would dutifully perform their silent ballet, their panels tracking the arc of a sun that no one is there to see, generating gigawatts of power for a world that has no use for it. These are our mechanical ghosts, machines built to serve, now performing their tasks with perfect precision, but for no purpose at all. This ghostly echo of our power would be incredibly brief. The electrical grid that powered our world is one of the most complex machines ever built, and its greatest vulnerability is its need for perfect, instantaneous balance. The grid is not like a reservoir of water, where you can store vast amounts. It is more like a perfectly taut rope being pulled from both ends. On one end are the power plants, generating the supply. On the other end are all of us, using the demand. This balance must be maintained, second by second, 24 hours a day. If demand suddenly outstrips supply, you get a blackout. But in our empty world, the opposite would happen. Supply would vastly exceed demand, which has dropped to nearly zero. It would be like one side of the rope suddenly letting go. Automated safety systems at substations and power plants, designed to prevent overloads, would begin to trip. These failures would cascade through the network in a matter of hours, or at most, a few days. plunging the entire world into a complete and final darkness. The longevity of the power sources themselves would vary. Solar panels and hydroelectric turbines, having few moving parts, might remain mechanically capable of generating power for decades. But fossil fuel plants, reliant on a constant supply of coal, oil, or natural gas, would fall silent the moment their immediate fuel reserves ran out. The most complex and haunting ghosts would be our nuclear power plants. Every plant is built with multiple, redundant, automated safety systems. Upon sensing a grid failure, the control rods would instantly drop into the reactor cores in a procedure called a scram, shutting down the nuclear fission process within seconds. The reactors themselves would be safe. The more pressing problem lies with the spent fuel pools, where highly radioactive used fuel rods are stored in deep pools of water to be kept cool. These pools require a constant circulation of water, driven by electric pumps. With the grid down, backup diesel generators would kick in, but they would only have enough fuel for a week or so. Once the pumps stopped, the water in the pools would begin to boil away. Within a matter of weeks or months, the water level would drop, exposing the intensely hot fuel rods to the air, where they would melt down, releasing clouds of radioactive material into the immediate environment. And what of our digital ghosts? The internet, reliant on a constant stream of electricity to power its servers and routers, would cease to exist almost as quickly as the power grid. But the data itself, our entire collected knowledge, our art, our music, our trivialities, would persist for a little longer. Stored on hard drives as microscopic magnetic patterns, or on solid-state drives as trapped electrical charges, our digital legacy would begin a slow decay called bit rot. Background radiation from the cosmos and the slow thermal jiggling of atoms would, over decades and centuries, gradually flip these stored ones and zeros into a random, meaningless static. Our entire civilization's library would fade, like a photograph left out in the sun. We created machines to be our tireless servants, to extend our reach and our memory beyond the limits of our own bodies. In a world without us, they become monuments not to our ingenuity, but to our profound and sudden absence. A single light, burning in an empty room, is one of the loneliest sights in the universe. And as our machines fall silent and our lights go out, the planet's own great engines, its vast and powerful climate and weather systems, no longer feeling the constant pressure of our industrial breath, would begin to stir and shift into a new, ancient rhythm. Have you ever stood outside just before a thunderstorm and felt the air change? There is a sudden stillness, a shift in the pressure, a scent of ozone and distant rain that tells you something immense is about to happen. Now, imagine feeling that same subtle, powerful shift in the atmosphere, not for a single afternoon, but for an entire century. This is what would happen to the Earth's climate. With our industrial civilization gone, the planet's vast weather engines would begin to move to a new and ancient rhythm, a slow rebalancing act on a global scale. The weather would become different, wilder in some places and calmer in others. The very patterns of rain might shift, no longer seeded and made more intense by the pollution particles from our cities. Hurricanes, their paths no longer impeded by the strange and complex thermal effects of coastal megacities, might follow older, forgotten tracks across the oceans. In the high mountains, the slow, imperceptible advance of glaciers would begin anew, no longer held in check by the planet's artificial fever. The Earth would begin to breathe again, a deep, slow respiration measured in decades and centuries, entirely on its own time. The most significant change, of course, revolves around the gas that defined our era. Carbon dioxide, or CO2. For 2 centuries, we pumped it into the atmosphere, thickening the invisible blanket that keeps our planet warm. This is the greenhouse effect. In our empty world, those emissions would stop instantly. But that does not mean the warming would stop. The excess CO2 we already put there has a very long atmospheric lifetime, remaining in the air for hundreds, even thousands of years. The planet also has a tremendous amount of thermal inertia. The oceans, in particular, have absorbed a vast quantity of heat and are slow to release it. So, while we would have stopped adding thickness to the planet's blanket, the extra warmth from the blanket we already wove would persist for a very long time, a lingering fever from a bygone age. The Earth's recovery would depend on the slow, patient work of the natural carbon cycle. The vast green tide of new forests would be the first line of defense, breathing in CO2 through photosynthesis and locking it away as wood and leaves. But the true hero of this story would be the ocean. The ocean is the world's largest carbon sink, absorbing enormous quantities of CO2 from the atmosphere. This is a slow, gradual process of gas dissolving into the water's surface and then being circulated into the deep. But this healing process comes at a cost. As the ocean absorbs more CO2, it becomes more acidic, a profound chemical change that would have long-lasting consequences for marine life. It would take at least 1,000 years for these natural processes to slowly draw down the atmospheric CO2 to pre-industrial levels, a long, planetary sigh of relief. The climate would not simply revert to how it was before us. It would find a new, and perhaps unpredictable, equilibrium. Some of the aerosols and pollution we created, particularly sulfates, actually had a cooling effect by reflecting sunlight back into space. The sudden disappearance of this global dimming effect could cause a temporary, sharp warming in some industrial regions, even as the long-term trend began to bend towards cooling. This could lead to chaotic and unforeseen shifts in global weather patterns. The delicate balance that creates the monsoon seasons in Asia could be altered. The path of the jet stream, the great river of air that dictates weather for North America and Europe, could shift north or south, plunging formerly temperate regions into long droughts or periods of intense storms. The climate wouldn't be broken, but it would be different, a complex system seeking a new balance point after being suddenly released from a powerful, century-long disturbance. For generations, we have talked about saving the planet, but standing in this new world, feeling the shift in the winds, one might come to a different realization. The planet does not need saving. It is a vast, powerful, and ultimately self-correcting system. It was only ever our own small, fragile, and wonderfully specific place within that system that was ever in danger. The planet will be fine. It was we who were the fleeting, unpredictable, and ultimately passing weather pattern. And for the 100 souls who remain, the last vestiges of that storm, their own internal world, their psychology, and their nascent society, would be undergoing a transformation every bit as profound as the one happening in the skies above. If you were to awaken one morning and find yourself one of the last 100 people on Earth, what would be your very first, deepest feeling? Would it be a quiet sense of relief, a release from the noise and pressure of a frantic world? Or would it be the crushing weight of the most profound and absolute loneliness imaginable? The psychology of these last survivors would be a landscape as complex and unexplored as the silent planet around them. Imagine the thoughts of one of them, walking through the empty streets of a city they once knew. There is a strange and dizzying duality to their existence. In one moment, they might feel like a monarch, the inheritor of a silent kingdom of unimaginable wealth, with all the world's art and treasures laid at their feet. In the next moment, they would feel like a ghost, haunting a graveyard 8 billion souls deep. Every empty window would seem to hold a familiar face. Every gust of wind would seem to carry the echo of a forgotten conversation. The weight of memory would be immense, a constant companion in the quiet. The struggle to find meaning and purpose, when the entire audience for your life has vanished, would be the greatest challenge of all. For human beings, community is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed a concept now known as Dunbar's number, which suggests that the human brain can only comfortably maintain a network of about 150 stable social relationships. A community of 100 people falls well within this number, which is a hopeful sign. It means that, in theory, they could form a single, tight-knit, and deeply interconnected tribe where everyone knows everyone else. But the psychological difference is the knowledge that this is not just a tribe, it is the tribe. It is not one small village in a world of many. It is the last flickering ember of the entire human species. This knowledge would transform every social interaction, every birth, every death, into an event of monumental significance. The well-known framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs provides a map for their journey. Their first priority would be the base of the pyramid, the physiological needs of food, water, and shelter, and the safety of securing their location. But once these are met, as they inevitably would be in a world of abandoned abundance, the higher needs would rush in with a desperate urgency. The need for love and belonging would be paramount, binding the group together. But what of esteem and self-actualization? How do you achieve a sense of purpose and accomplishment in a world where there is no one to recognize it? The answer is that their purpose would have to shift from the individual achievements that drove our world to a new, collective sense of duty. They would become the unwilling custodians of a dead civilization. A profound and pervasive sense of grief would likely permeate their culture. It would be a collective mourning for everyone they ever knew and for the entire world that was lost. This could manifest as a form of survivor's guilt on a species-wide scale, a constant, nagging question of, why us? To combat this, they might develop a compulsive need to preserve the past. They would become the world's last librarians, its final archivists, its most dedicated storytellers. The act of walking through a library, of carefully preserving the books, of reading the stories and histories of the lost world aloud to their children, would become a sacred ritual. It would be an act of remembrance, a way of honoring the ghosts and making sense of their own impossible existence. The central question of their lives would be the same one we all ask ourselves, but for them, it would have a terrible, literal weight. Who are we? Our identities are so often defined by our relationships, our jobs, our culture, our place in the vast, swirling sea of humanity. When that sea suddenly withdraws, leaving you as one of 100 solitary figures on an endless shore, do you spend your life trying to remember the sound of the ocean, or do you turn and learn the strange, new language of the sand? To survive, these 100 people would need to find more than just meaning. They would need to learn this new language, the practical knowledge of how to navigate a world where everything we made, from a simple can of food to a complex machine tool, is now a finite, precious, and irreplaceable relic from a forgotten age. What if every single object you touched was an antique, a precious and irreplaceable memory of a lost world? A simple, metal can opener, once a trivial kitchen gadget, would become a piece of history, a marvel of metallurgy and manufacturing that could never be made again. This is the new reality for the survivors. They would be living not in a world, but in a museum, a vast, sprawling, and slowly decaying library of artifacts. Imagine one of them walking through the silent aisles of a deserted supermarket. It is a perfect time capsule of our civilization's wants and needs. The shelves are still lined with cans of beans and tins of tuna, their colourful labels promising a freshness that is now measured in decades. In the toy aisle, brightly coloured plastic action figures, their packaging faded by the faint sunlight filtering through the dusty skylights, wait for hands that will never come to play with them. Every object here tells a profound story of a complex world that is no more. A simple jar of instant coffee speaks of global trade routes, of farming communities in South America, of complex roasting and packaging plants, and of a culture that was always in a hurry. Now, it is just a finite supply of a fading flavour, each spoonful a sip of a forgotten time. The survivors would be living on borrowed time, in a constant race against the slow, inexorable march of entropy. We can think of the shelf life of our goods as a kind of half-life, a measure of how long it takes for them to lose their usefulness. Canned foods, sealed in their metal containers, might remain edible for a few decades, but the complex vitamins and nutrients within would slowly break down, reducing their nutritional value year by year. Medicines in the abandoned pharmacies would be a crucial find, but their complex organic molecules are fragile. Each bottle would have an expiration date that is no longer a cautious suggestion, but a strict deadline, after which the medicine could become useless, or even dangerous. Packaged seeds, a treasure beyond price, would also have a ticking clock. Their viability, their very ability to sprout, decreasing with every passing season. The world would be a treasure chest of resources, but it would be a chest with a slowly dissolving bottom. Perhaps the greatest loss would not be the objects themselves, but the knowledge of how they worked and how they were made. Our modern world runs on a deep and often invisible ocean of what is called tacit knowledge. This is the difference between knowing that something works and knowing how to do it yourself. We have libraries filled with books containing explicit knowledge. You could find a textbook with diagrams explaining the principles of an internal combustion engine, or a manual on how to program a computer. But could you, personally, actually refine crude oil into gasoline, or forge a new piston for an engine, or etch a new microprocessor, just from reading a book? So much of our technological prowess was not stored in books, but in the hands and minds of trained specialists, an intuitive, practical skill passed from master to apprentice over years of practice. Without these people, our most advanced technology would be rendered into mysterious, inert artifacts. A smartphone would be a sleek black mirror, its inner magic forever locked away. A car would be a comfortable shelter, but its potential for movement would be an almost mythical property. The survivor's world would instead be defined by the fundamental material science of what we left behind, the very chemistry of preservation. They would quickly learn to prize certain materials. Stainless steel, its iron atoms protected from rust by a thin, invisible layer of chromium oxide, would be a treasure. A good stainless steel pot or a sharp knife would be an heirloom, passed down through generations. Gold and platinum, being almost completely chemically inert, would be valued not for their beauty, but for their permanence, perhaps used to make electrical contacts for a simple radio. Glass, as we know, is extraordinarily stable, but it is our plastics that would be the true, perplexing immortals of our age. They would be scavenged and repurposed endlessly, their durability a strange and useful gift from the very civilization whose consumption they so perfectly symbolized. Our world was not just made of people, it was made of our things, and in our absence, these things hold our memory. To live amongst them would be to have a constant, silent conversation with our ghosts, every object a quiet whisper from a loud and busy past. But beyond these inert artifacts, what of the things that cannot be canned or bottled? The most fundamental knowledge of all, the living, breathing library of seeds and genes that underpin our entire food supply, and the desperate struggle to keep that library from closing forever. Imagine holding a single, tiny, dormant seed in the palm of your hand. In our world, it is a commonplace thing, a symbol of potential. But in a world of only 100 people, that seed is something far more profound. It is not just a future plant. It is a living promise. It is a library of millions of years of evolutionary wisdom, a genetic key, and perhaps the only thing standing between your community and the slow decline into starvation. The single most important task for the survivors, once they have established a safe place to live, would be to become gardeners. Imagine them, clearing a space in an overgrown city park, the ruins of a skyscraper casting a long shadow over their work. They have found a priceless treasure, not of gold, but of seeds, perhaps from a local seed bank or a forgotten botanical garden. The act of planting is no longer a simple chore. It is slow, deliberate, almost prayerful. They are not just growing food for the coming winter. They are desperately trying to save entire species from vanishing from the human experience forever. The failure of a single crop, the loss of a single variety of corn or wheat, could mean the permanent erasure of that flavor, that specific form of nourishment, from the future of humanity. Their greatest challenge would be overcoming the immense fragility of our modern food system. For the last century, we have engaged in a grand agricultural experiment called monoculture, planting vast fields with a single, highly productive, but genetically uniform, variety of a crop. This approach was incredibly efficient, but it was also incredibly dangerous. It's like building an entire city out of a single type of brick. If you discover a flaw in that brick, the entire city is at risk of collapse. These genetically identical crops are exquisitely vulnerable to a single disease or pest that evolves to overcome their specific defenses. The survivors would intuitively understand this danger. They would need to become genetic archivists, treasure hunters seeking out the lost diversity of our food. They would search for old heirloom varieties in forgotten gardens, and if they were incredibly lucky, they might find one of the world's great seed vaults, like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. This real-world facility is a concrete ark, buried deep in the permafrost, holding backup copies of the world's crop diversity. For the survivors, Discovering such a place would be like a medieval scholar discovering the lost library of Alexandria. It would be the book of life. But even with a vault full of seeds, their survival is not guaranteed. A seed is only potential. It is useless without the tacit knowledge of how to make it grow. The right type of soil, the right amount of water, the right climate, the specific techniques of germination and harvesting, all this was knowledge we stored not just in books, but in the generational wisdom of farming communities. The survivors would have to rediscover this wisdom through painstaking trial and error. And they would have to re-engage with a part of the ecosystem we had tried so hard to control. The pollinators. Many of our most important crops, from apples to almonds, rely on insects like bees to reproduce. With the collapse of industrial agriculture and the widespread use of pesticides, wild pollinator populations might begin to rebound, but their behavior would be unpredictable. The survivors would have to become keen observers of their local environment, learning the delicate and intricate dance of symbiosis. They would learn which flowers attract which insects, and when those insects are active. It is a deep ecological knowledge that our hunter-gatherer ancestors possessed as a matter of course, but which we have almost entirely forgotten. For generations, we took the endless bounty of the earth for granted, viewing it as a resource to be endlessly and efficiently harvested. For the last 100 people, a single, perfectly ripe tomato, grown with their own hands, would be nothing short of a miracle. It would be a sacrament, a tangible symbol of their own fragile and precious stewardship over the continuity of life itself. And as they slowly relearn to read the patterns of the land beneath their feet, they would also be forced to look up and relearn how to read the great, unchanging clock of the sky, for it would soon become their only reliable guide in a world without timekeepers. When all the clocks in the world have stopped, when the digital displays are blank and the silent hands of every timepiece are frozen in a moment of a forgotten past, where do you look to tell the time? You look up. You look to the great, unchanging clock of the cosmos, a timepiece of magnificent precision that has marked the passage of eons with a quiet and flawless rhythm. Imagine one of the survivors, lying on their back in the soft, overgrown grass of what was once a brightly lit city park, now a sanctuary of perfect darkness. For the first time in their life, they are truly seeing the night sky. It is not a distant, muted thing, but a vast, glittering tapestry that feels so close it seems to press down upon the world. The slow, majestic procession of the constellations, the steady, reassuring cycle of the moon's phases, the breathtaking sweep of the Milky Way galaxy arcing overhead like a celestial road. This is the grand clockwork of the universe, patient, eternal, and utterly indifferent to the small affairs of a vanished civilization. For this new humanity, understanding its movements would become one of the most essential skills for survival. The ancient arts of celestial navigation, once the quaint hobby of sailors and astronomers, would be reborn as a fundamental science. They would learn to find the North Star, Polaris, that single, steady point in the northern sky around which all the other stars appear to pivot, a reliable compass for any journey. They would learn that by measuring the angle of that star above the horizon, they could determine their latitude, their exact distance from the equator, allowing them to create the first new maps of their changed world. The path of the sun across the sky would give them their cardinal directions, and its height at noon would mark the slow passage of the seasons. This brings us to the very foundation of life on Earth, the reason for the seasons themselves. They would learn, through careful observation, that the seasons are not caused by the Earth's changing distance from the sun, but by the elegant fact that our planet is tilted on its axis, a tilt of about 23.5 degrees. As the Earth makes its year-long journey in orbit, this tilt means that for part of the year, the northern hemisphere is angled more directly towards the sun, receiving more concentrated sunlight and experiencing summer, while the southern hemisphere is angled away, experiencing winter. Then, 6 months later, the situation is reversed. Understanding this gentle planetary nod is the very basis of all agriculture. The solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year, and the equinoxes, when day and night are of equal length, would cease to be abstract dates on a calendar. They would become the most important and sacred days of the year, profound markers for planting and harvesting, for celebration and preparation. But the starry sky would offer more than just a clock and a calendar. It would offer a profound sense of perspective. Imagine them gazing up at a particularly bright star, like Sirius, the dog star, which shines at a distance of about 8.6 light-years from Earth. They would understand what a light-year truly means. The immense distance that light, the fastest thing in the universe, travels in a single year. And in that understanding, a startling and poignant realization would dawn. The light from Sirius that is reaching their eyes on that night, in that empty world, actually left the surface of its star 8.6 years ago. It began its journey across the void when the world was still full, when the cities were still bright and loud, when there were billions of people to look up and see it. Stargazing would become an act of time travel. Every star in the sky would be a postcard from the past, a physical connection to the world they had lost, its light still faithfully arriving long after the recipients were gone. In a world where every human landmark, every monument and every book is in a state of decay, the stars would offer a map that will not fade, a clock that will not stop, and a history that will not be forgotten. They are a humbling reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is an order and a beauty to the universe that persists, magnificent and eternal. Yet this newly cleared sky, so full of ancient light, would soon begin to reveal other, stranger lights as well. The silent, tumbling, and fleeting stars of our own making, our abandoned children left to wander the heavens, beginning their long, slow fall home. Have you ever seen a shooting star, a fleeting streak of light across the night sky, and made a silent wish upon it? What would you wish for if you knew that the star was not a rock from deep space, but a piece of your own lost home, falling back to Earth in a final, fiery salute? Decades, and then a century, into this new quiet age, the night sky would become more active than it had been at any point in human history. It would be filled with a constant, gentle rain of these falling stars. But they would not be meteors. They would be the thousands of satellites we placed in orbit, the glittering constellation of our own creation, finally surrendering to gravity and burning up in the atmosphere. Each one would be a silent, beautiful, and transient firework, a final farewell from the space age. To understand why they would fall, one has to understand what keeps them up in the first place. A satellite in orbit is in a state of a perfect, delicate balance. It is constantly being pulled towards the Earth by the relentless force of gravity, but it is also moving forward at an immense velocity, thousands of miles per hour. It is, in effect, constantly falling, but moving so fast horizontally that it continually misses the planet, curving around it in a stable orbit. But even in what we call the vacuum of space, in low Earth orbit, there are still traces of our atmosphere, a few stray molecules of gas. For a satellite moving at 17,000 miles per hour, hitting these molecules is like a car driving into a constant, gentle headwind. This is the force of atmospheric drag. It is an infinitesimally small force, but it is constant and relentless. Over years and decades, this gentle drag would be enough to slowly bleed a satellite of its immense orbital velocity, causing its altitude to gradually decay. Its orbit would shrink, slowly spiraling inwards, until it finally hit the denser upper atmosphere, where friction would incinerate it in a brilliant, silent flash. This process would not be entirely orderly. The space around our planet is not just full of satellites. It is littered with debris, the junk of our 60 years in space, from spent rocket stages to a single glove dropped by an astronaut. This orbital debris field raises the spectre of a phenomenon known as the Kessler syndrome, a cascading chain reaction. A single collision between two objects in orbit could shatter them, creating a cloud of thousands of new pieces of debris. Each of these pieces then becomes a projectile that can cause another collision, creating even more debris. Our orbital highways could become a self-perpetuating celestial minefield, a strange and violent legacy grinding our proudest achievements into dust. Not all of our orbital children would fall, however. Some would remain as eternal monuments. High above the Earth, at a very specific altitude of 35,786 kilometers, is a special place called geostationary orbit. Here, a satellite orbits at the exact same speed as the Earth's rotation, which means it appears to hang motionless in the sky over a single point on the equator. Our global communications network depended on this celestial ring of silent partners. At this extreme altitude, the atmosphere is so thin that drag is negligible. These satellites will not fall. They will remain a perfect, invisible ring of silent sentinels, orbiting the planet for thousands, perhaps even millions of years. Their electronics long dead, their solar panels battered by micrometeorites. They will become the most enduring monument of humanity. Long after our cities have turned to dust and our plastics have eroded into the rock, this ghostly ring will remain. It will be a celestial Stonehenge, an elegant and mysterious artifact for any future intelligence, perhaps from another world or another species on this one, to gaze upon and wonder what kind of beings could have reached so high, and then so suddenly vanished. We reached for the heavens, and we left our glittering, technological fingerprints all over them. To watch them fall, night after night, would be to watch our own ambition and brilliance turning to beautiful, fleeting dust. Each streak of light would be a memory, a story, a dream of global connection, now silent, burning its way gently home. And while our ghosts continued their silent dance in the orbits above, down on the surface, the planet's own lifeblood, the great and silent depths of the ocean, would begin to heal, its vast heart starting to beat to a new and quieter rhythm. Can you imagine an ocean so quiet that the song of a single humpback whale could travel, unimpeded, across 1,000 miles of clear, blue water? Can you picture a world beneath the waves where the only sounds are the clicking of dolphins, the grinding of a parrotfish on a coral reef, and the deep, resonant pulse of the planet itself? This would be the great healing of the silent depths. Let us dive beneath the surface of this new ocean. The first and most immediate change would be the quality of the silence. For more than a century, we have filled the seas with a cacophony of noise. The low-frequency thrum of countless container ship propellers, the explosive blasts of seismic air guns used for oil exploration, the constant pinging of military and commercial sonar, all of this created a thick, persistent soup of sound. Sound travels 4 times faster and far more efficiently in water than in air. And for the creatures who live in the ocean, this was like living inside a factory that never, ever fell silent. For cetaceans, the whales and dolphins who see their world and communicate within it through sound, our noise was a blinding fog. It masked their calls to each other, interfered with their navigation, and drowned out the subtle sounds of their prey. The sudden cessation of this noise would be the single greatest relief imaginable for the life of the sea. The fog would lift. Communication would be possible again across entire ocean basins. A world of intricate conversation, which we had so rudely interrupted, would resume. In this new quiet, the waters would also begin to clear, and life would begin its slow and patient return. On a tropical reef, the ghostly white skeletons of coral, bleached by the stress of warming and acidified waters, would begin to show tentative, isolated flecks of returning color as new, more resilient polyps take hold. But the legacy of our time would not be so easily erased. While we would no longer be adding to the great, swirling gyres of plastic in the oceans, the trillions of pieces already there would remain, a persistent and toxic plague. Plastic in the ocean undergoes a process of photodegradation, where the sun's ultraviolet rays break the large pieces down not into their constituent molecules, but into smaller and smaller fragments. A plastic bottle becomes 1,000 microplastic shreds, each one a tiny, indigestible sponge for chemical pollutants. These particles would continue to circulate in the currents for millennia, being ingested by plankton, working their way up the food chain, and eventually settling on the seabed to become a permanent and unmistakable layer in the sediment, a marker of our passing. Yet, despite this lingering poison, the sheer abundance of life would be staggering. The single greatest pressure we placed on the oceans was industrial fishing. With the world's fishing fleets rusting in their harbours, marine populations would rebound with a speed and on a scale that is difficult to imagine. Vast schools of herring and sardines, numbering in the billions, would once again move like great, shimmering silver clouds through the coastal waters. And with this explosion of prey would come the return of the great predators. Tuna, sharks, marlins, and swordfish whose populations we had decimated, would reclaim their place at the apex of the marine food web. The balance of the ocean, which we had so severely tilted towards smaller and smaller fish, would begin to right itself. The ocean is the planet's womb, the place where life first sparked into existence billions of years ago. In our brief time as the world's dominant species, we treated it with the carelessness of a spoiled child, as both a convenient sewer and an infinite larder. In our absence, it would slowly and patiently begin the process of cleansing itself. Its returning silence not a sign of emptiness, but the sound of a language we had never bothered to learn, finally being spoken once more. And as the oceans began their long recovery, the very land itself, the solid ground beneath our feet, would continue its own slow, inexorable transformation, burying our cities and our memory under new, living layers of earth, preparing a new page in the great stone book of the world. Millions of years from now, long after the last skyscraper has crumbled into a soil-covered mound, what fossil will our civilization leave behind? It will not be the elegant skeleton of a mighty dinosaur. It will most likely be the ghostly, perfect outline of a plastic bottle, pressed into a layer of hardened rock. To understand this, we must journey forward into deep time, a timescale so vast it dwarfs the entirety of human history. Imagine a future geologist, perhaps a being of a species not yet evolved, drilling a core sample from the rock of what was once a coastal floodplain. As they pull the long cylinder of sediment from the earth, they see the expected layers of sand, silt, and clay, each a record of ancient floods and quiet millennia. But then, they come to a strange, thin, and globally consistent layer that looks like nothing else in the planet's history. It is a dark band in the rock, filled with peculiar chemistry and bizarre, manufactured shapes. This is the layer of our world. This is the Anthropocene. Geologists read the history of the Earth in its rock layers, a field of study known as stratigraphy. Each layer, or stratum, is like a page in a book, telling the story of a different time. A thick band of coal speaks of ancient swamp forests. A layer of volcanic ash tells of a mighty eruption. Scientists today are debating whether our impact is significant enough to define a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. To a geologist of the distant future, the answer would be an unequivocal yes. Our layer would be unmistakable. This stratum would be defined by a series of unique signals, what some scientists have called technofossils. These are the remnants of our technology that are resistant enough to decay to survive on a geological timescale. They would find fragments of concrete, a man-made rock that had never existed before. They would find alloys of aluminum and stainless steel, metals that do not appear in these pure, refined forms in nature. They would find the aforementioned microscopic fragments of plastic, a complex polymer whose carbon signature would be utterly alien. They would also find strange new concentrations of nitrogen and phosphates, the lingering signature of our agricultural fertilizers, and a worldwide spike in radionuclides like plutonium, the indelible, radioactive fingerprint of our atmospheric nuclear tests in the mid-20th century. This unique combination of signals, appearing all at once in a thin layer all over the planet, would be a clear and shocking marker of a sudden, world-altering event. But what would be strangely absent from this layer is us. Fossilization, the process that preserves the remains of a living creature, is an incredibly rare event. It requires an organism to die and be buried in sediment very quickly, before it can decay or be eaten. Most of the billions of humans who have ever lived have died in conditions that are completely unsuitable for fossilization. Our remains have simply returned to the soil, as all life does. The fossil record of the Anthropocene would therefore be bizarre and confusing. It would show a major mass extinction event, what we call the Holocene extinction, with countless species of plants and animals suddenly vanishing from the layers of rock. And then, it would show the abrupt appearance of this thin, strange layer of technofossils, with almost no corresponding fossils of the creatures who made them. We see our civilization as the pinnacle of the Earth's history, the solid and permanent ground upon which the future will be built. But to the planet, on the vast and patient scale of geology, we are something else entirely. We are a brief, explosive, and puzzling event. We are a thin seam of strange chemistry and perplexing artifacts in the rock, a bewildering chapter in a book that is billions of years old and will continue long after our strange, short page has been turned. For the 100 survivors, however, this unimaginably deep future is a distant abstraction. Their more immediate and desperate concern is the here and now, the challenge of passing on not just their genes for survival, but the very essence of what made us human in the first place. The fragile, fading miracle of language. If you were given the task of saving the English language, but you could only choose 100 words to preserve for the future, which words would you choose? Would you choose words for survival, like water, food, and shelter? Or would you choose words for the human spirit, like love, dream, and hope? This is the profound dilemma that would face the last survivors, the great and silent fading of the world's tongues. Let us listen in, for a moment, to the conversations of their children, or their children's children, a generation or two into this new world. Their language would sound strange to our ears, a unique blend, a creole, formed from the fragments of the languages their ancestors brought with them. More striking than the new words, however, would be the old words that are missing. The specific, technical names for the parts of a machine are gone. The vast and subtle vocabulary we have for economics, for politics, for digital technology, has vanished, because the concepts themselves no longer exist. The names of 1,000 different pop songs, the titles of 1,000,000 forgotten books, the complex words we use to describe our most nuanced emotions, all are fading. Language is eroding like a coastline in a storm, the fine, sandy details washing away, leaving only the simple, sturdy stones of everyday meaning behind. This is a process known as language death, and it would happen on a catastrophic scale. In our world, there are approximately 7,000 living languages, each a unique and intricate tapestry of human thought. With the human population reduced to 100 individuals, scattered across the globe, the vast majority of these languages would become extinct in an instant, when their last speakers vanished. The survivors, likely coming from different linguistic backgrounds, would be forced to communicate using a simplified contact language, a pidgin. Over time, as their children are born into this world, they would take that simple pidgin and expand it, giving it a consistent grammar and a richer vocabulary. It would become a full, natural language, a creole, the first new tongue of this new humanity. But with the infrastructure of our civilization gone, the ability to create new paper, new ink, new books, and new printing presses would be lost. Their culture would be forced to shift from a predominantly written one to a predominantly oral one. Knowledge, history, and wisdom would no longer be stored on shelves, but in memory. They would be passed down through the time-honored traditions of storytelling, of myth, and of song. Oral traditions are powerful, and they use clever techniques like rhyme, rhythm, and repetition to make information more memorable. But they also change the information over time. The precise, technical details of how a nuclear power plant failed might, over centuries of retelling around a campfire, slowly transform into a myth about a forbidden, poisoned land, a place where the gods fell asleep and a great dragon still guards the earth with its toxic breath. The very meaning of the words that did survive would begin to change, a process called semantic drift. The word car, for example, might endure, but it would no longer conjure an image of speed and freedom. It would refer to a strange, motionless, rusting metal shelter, a convenient place to store dried goods or to hide from the rain. Words that were once central to our lives, like internet or stock market, would become ghost words, their meanings completely lost, like ancient runes from a forgotten magic. The language would reshape itself to fit their new reality. The most important, most powerful, and most numerous words in their vocabulary would be the ones they needed every day. The names of edible plants and dangerous animals, the words for tools and for the bonds of kinship, the descriptions of the weather and the stars. A language is not just a collection of words that we use to communicate. It is a worldview. It is a vast repository of a culture's entire way of thinking, feeling, and seeing the world. To lose a language is to lose a unique way of being human, The survivors would be engaged in a desperate and perhaps unconscious struggle, trying to save a whole galaxy of human thought from collapsing into a single, lonely point of light. And as the old words for our complex world began to lose their meaning, they might begin to seek a new, more powerful, and more universal language. One written not in the fading letters of an alphabet, but in the eternal and unchanging symbols of mathematics. In a world where all the stories we ever told might be forgotten, what single, absolute truth could you carve into a piece of stone, confident that it would be understood 1,000,000 years from now by any intelligent being who found it? The answer would not be a line of poetry, or a religious commandment, or a historical fact. It would be an equation. Imagine one of the survivors, a former teacher or engineer, sitting on a sandy beach with the community's children. They are not drawing pictures of animals. They are drawing shapes. First, a perfect circle. Then, a right-angled triangle. With a stick, the teacher carefully traces a square on each of the triangle's 3 sides and shows the children that the area of the 2 smaller squares, when added together, perfectly equals the area of the largest square. This is Pythagoras' theorem. It is a piece of pure, unassailable truth. It was true for the ancient Greeks who formalized it, and it was true for the dinosaurs 100 million years before them. It will be true 1 billion years from now. It is as true in our solar system as it is in a distant galaxy. For a small community adrift in a sea of loss and uncertainty, such perfect, unchanging truths would be a psychological anchor, a foundation of certainty upon which they could begin to rebuild a sense of order. This leads to a deep philosophical question. Is mathematics something we invent, or something we discover? For these survivors, it would feel, with every fibre of their being, like a discovery. They would feel as if they were uncovering the universe's own native language. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, the mystical number pi, is a fundamental constant of the cosmos, its value woven into the very fabric of space-time. The strange and beautiful patterns of the prime numbers are eternal and independent of any human mind to conceive of them. This universal language of logic and number would not just be a philosophical comfort, it would be intensely practical. The fundamental principles of physics would be rediscovered not through dusty textbooks, but through the raw necessity of survival. The power of the lever would be learned by anyone needing to move a heavy log. The strength of the arch and the truss would be rediscovered by anyone trying to build a stable shelter that will not collapse. The principles of optics would be stumbled upon by a child playing with a shard of curved glass, noticing how it can focus the sun's rays into a single, hot point, a point hot enough to start a fire. They would not call it physics or engineering. They would call it what works. And in doing so, they would be reenacting the birth of the scientific method in its purest form. To observe the world, to form a hypothesis, to test it, and to learn. To preserve this most vital knowledge for a distant future, beyond the lifespan of their own new oral culture, they would have to think like the astronomers of our own time, who design messages for extraterrestrial intelligence. Think of the Arecibo message, a radio signal we beamed towards a distant star cluster in 1974. It was a message written in binary, the simplest possible language of ones and zeros. It used prime numbers as a guide to its structure, and it encoded fundamental data about our numbering system, the key elements of our chemistry, the double helix of our DNA, and our place in our solar system. This is the kind of thinking the survivors would need. To leave a message that transcends language, you must use the language of the universe itself. For generations, we filled the world with our stories, our opinions, our beliefs, our arguments, our ever-changing and conflicting truths. But beneath all that noise, the universe has always been speaking its own language, a quiet and elegant language of logic, pattern, and law. To rediscover it would be to find a source of truth that cannot be argued with, a firm foundation of reason on which to build a new world. And yet, humanity is not just a creature of logic and reason. We are also creatures of art, of spirit, of the strange and inexplicable need to create beauty in the face of chaos. What, in this new, quiet world, would happen to art? When the great museums of the world have crumbled into dust, when the symphonies have faded into an unremembered silence, And when the ink on every poem has bleached into invisibility, where does art go? It does not vanish. It simply goes home. It returns to the place where it was born, to a story told around a flickering campfire, to a shape carved into a piece of wood, to a song sung up to the silent, watching stars. Imagine a scene, a few decades into this new world, around the fire that is the heart of this small community. The survivors are not just exchanging practical information about the day's foraging. One of them, a gifted storyteller, is recounting the hunt for a wild boar, but they are embellishing it, giving the animal a cunning personality, making the chase more dramatic, building the tension until the children gasp, and then bringing it to a conclusion that makes everyone laugh. This is literature, being born anew. Another person sits slightly apart, patiently sanding a piece of driftwood, not to make a tool, but to bring out the shape of a bird they see in the grain. This is sculpture. And later, as the fire dies down to embers, someone begins to hum a simple, haunting melody, a tune half remembered from the old world, but they have put new words to it, words that speak of their lives, their sorrows, and their hopes. This is music. From the perspective of evolutionary psychology, art is not a mere luxury, a decorative flourish on the surface of life. It is a fundamental survival mechanism, a crucial tool that helped our species thrive. The stories we tell are powerful simulations. They allow us to experience scenarios, a dangerous hunt, a social conflict, a difficult journey, and learn from them without having to face the actual risk. The visual art we create, the symbols we paint and carve, helps to forge a powerful group identity, a shared sense of meaning and belonging that is essential for a cooperative community. And the music and dance that are so central to every human culture are incredibly powerful tools for fostering social cohesion, for synchronizing our emotions and our movements, and for building the deep bonds of trust that a small tribe needs to survive. For the last 100 people, art would not be something they go to a gallery to see. It would be woven into the very fabric of their existence, a practical and essential part of their psychological toolkit for navigating a lonely and often frightening world. In a world filled with the incomprehensible ruins of a godlike civilization, their art would naturally intertwine with the rebirth of myth. How else could they explain the world around them? The rusting, skeletal remains of a commercial airliner, half buried in a forest, might become the fallen chariot of a forgotten sun god. The silent, concrete towers of a nuclear power plant, a place where the air still feels strange and the animals will not go, would become a cursed land, the home of a sleeping poison god that must never be awakened. And the steady, silent passage of a single geostationary satellite, appearing in the same spot in the sky every single night, like an unblinking eye, could be interpreted as a watchful ancestral spirit, a guardian star for their small tribe. They would create a new pantheon of gods and a new cycle of myths. Not out of superstition, but out of a deep human need to create a narrative, to find meaning in the chaos, and to explain the vast, silent, and mysterious world they had inherited. Their art would be shaped by the materials at hand, an art of scavenging and recycling. They would make pigments from crushed berries for red, charcoal for black, and powdered rust from a decaying car for a deep, earthy orange. They would weave tapestries from scavenged electrical wire and sculpt strange, beautiful forms from the colourful, immortal plastic that was so abundant. Their world would become their canvas. We have grown to think of our art as something separate from our daily lives, a thing to be consumed in quiet halls and hushed galleries. But for them, it would return to its raw and powerful origins. For art, at its core, is the fundamental human impulse to impose meaning onto a chaotic universe, to find a pattern in the noise, to leave a mark, and to say to the great, silent emptiness, I was here, and this is what I saw, and this is what it felt like. This profound act of seeing, of being a conscious and feeling observer in the universe, is perhaps the most precious thing the 100 survivors carry. But what if, in all this vastness, they are not the only ones watching? For nearly a century, we drenched our planet in an invisible sphere of radio waves, broadcasting our existence to the stars. The faint signals of our first television shows, our rock and roll music, our declarations of war and our pleas for peace, are still traveling outwards at the speed of light, a ghostly bubble of noise expanding into the cosmos. What if something, somewhere, was listening? And what if it has only now, in this new era, just begun to notice our sudden, deafening, and absolute silence? Let us pan out, far from our small, quiet Earth, into the unimaginable blackness of interstellar space. Imagine a hypothetical alien intelligence, perhaps a civilization millions of years older than our own, whose telescopes have been casually observing our solar system for eons. For billions of years, they saw a stable, ordinary planet. Then, in one astonishingly brief flicker of cosmic time, they would have seen a series of shocking changes. A sudden spike in the chemical composition of our atmosphere, a brief, incandescent flash of city lights appearing on the night side of the planet. And then, the arrival of that strange, chaotic, and unprecedented bubble of radio waves. And then, just as suddenly as it all began, it would stop. The lights would go out. The radio would fall silent. The atmospheric chemistry would begin its slow return to equilibrium. For such an observer, our brief, noisy appearance and sudden disappearance would be a profound and perhaps tragic data point in their understanding of the universe. It would speak directly to a great and troubling question that we ourselves have asked, a puzzle known as the Fermi paradox. The paradox is simple. The universe is so vast and so old, and the chemical ingredients for life seem to be so common, that it seems statistically inevitable that intelligent life should have arisen countless times. And yet, when we listen to the stars, we hear nothing but silence. Where is everybody? Our story, the story of a species that achieved global technological prowess and then vanished in the blink of an eye, would offer a chilling answer. It would suggest that intelligence might not be rare, but that technologically advanced civilizations are inherently unstable and tragically short-lived. We would become a cosmic ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered across the galaxy. Our fate would be a powerful piece of evidence for a concept known as the Great Filter. This is the idea that there is some evolutionary or technological barrier that is so difficult for life to overcome that almost no species ever makes it past it. The question is that filter in our past or in our future? Did we already pass the hard part, perhaps in making the leap from single-celled to complex life? Or is the hardest part still ahead? Our demise would be a strong vote for the latter. It would suggest that the Great Filter is the transition from a planet-bound, squabbling, and short-sighted technological species to a stable, wise, and long-lasting one. It might be the single hardest step in the universe. But perhaps the unseen observers are not in the distant stars. Perhaps they are here, on Earth, already. We have always acted with the arrogance of being the only truly intelligent minds on the planet, but this may be a profound failure of our imagination. Consider the alien intelligence of an octopus, with its distributed brain and its incredible problem-solving skills. Consider the complex social and linguistic world of dolphins and whales. Consider the possibility that the vast, underground fungal networks that connect entire forests are a form of slow, conscious, collective intelligence that we are utterly incapable of comprehending. In our loud and disruptive absence, with the immense ecological pressure of humanity finally removed, could one of these other intelligences, over the course of millions of years, evolve towards a more manipulative, tool-using form of sapience? What would they think, these future thinkers of Earth, when their geology uncovered that strange thin layer of plastic and steel we left behind? We have always acted as if we were the universe's only audience, as if our story was the only one that truly mattered. To imagine our silence being noted by another is to be profoundly humbled. It is to finally realize that we may not be the playwrights of the great cosmic drama, but perhaps just one group of actors in a single, fleeting scene of a play whose true scale we can barely begin to comprehend. And for the 100 actors left on our small, quiet stage, their most challenging act is about to begin. Can they, against all the odds, succeed where 8 billion of their predecessors failed? To save the future of humanity, you need more than stories and tools. You need more than a rediscovered knowledge of the stars and the soil. You need a deep, hidden and ancient resilience. A strength that is written not in books, but in the intricate, spiraling code of your own cells. The final and greatest challenge for the last 100 people would not be found in the rusting ruins or the reclaiming wilderness, but within their own bodies. The question is a stark one. Do 100 individuals possess enough genetic diversity to carry the flame of our species into the future? Imagine the children born into this new world. They are precious beyond any measure we can comprehend. Every cough, every fever, every stumble and fall would be a source of immense, community-wide anxiety. The entire group would watch over them with a fierce and tender protectiveness, knowing that the sum total of humanity's future rests in their small, fragile bodies. They are not just children, they are the last, flickering hope of a species on the very brink of extinction. In the science of conservation biology, there is a concept called the minimum viable population. It is the smallest possible number of individuals that a species needs to have a reasonable chance of surviving in the wild over the long term, without succumbing to disasters or genetic decay. A general guideline, often called the 5500 rule, suggests that you need at least 50 individuals to avoid the immediate and devastating effects of inbreeding, and you need at least 500 to maintain enough genetic diversity to adapt to future changes and avoid the slow, inexorable decay of the gene pool. A starting population of 100 is therefore in a deeply precarious position. It is on a genetic knife edge. Survival is possible, but it is far from guaranteed. They are living within a phenomenon known as a genetic bottleneck. With such a small and limited gene pool, the variety of human genetics, all the beautiful and subtle differences that once spanned 8 billion people, is reduced to what is carried within their own bodies. This creates a serious danger. All of us carry harmful recessive alleles, which are variations of genes that can cause diseases, but which only express themselves if we inherit a copy from both of our parents. In a large population, the chances of two unrelated people carrying the same harmful recessive allele are very low. But in a small population, where everyone is eventually going to be related to everyone else, those chances increase dramatically with every passing generation. This is the cause of inbreeding depression, a decline in the overall health and fitness of the population that can lead to reduced fertility, compromised immune systems, and a tragic increase in infant mortality. To survive this, the community would have to become the most careful and intuitive geneticists in human history. They would have to develop strict social customs, perhaps even a kind of lottery system, to ensure that partnerships were formed between the most genetically dissimilar individuals possible, a heartbreakingly pragmatic approach to love and family, all in the service of their children's future. Yet, this same genetic crucible would also contain a spark of hope. This small, isolated population would be subject to the intense and unforgiving pressures of natural selection. In this new and wilder world, certain traits would offer a profound survival advantage. A robust natural immunity to local diseases, a more efficient metabolism for surviving lean winters, a greater physical resilience, or a brain wired for quick, adaptive learning. Individuals with these traits would be more likely to survive and have healthy children, passing those advantageous genes on. Over many generations of this intense selective pressure, a new kind of human might begin to emerge, one who is hardier, healthier, and more exquisitely adapted to a life in balance with the natural world. It would be a brutal and painful process, the harsh and unsentimental engine of evolution playing out in real time, with the fate of a species as its stake. The long story of humanity has always been one of surviving such bottlenecks. Around 70,000 years ago, our own ancestors were reduced to a few thousand individuals. Our very existence today is a testament to the quiet, stubborn resilience encoded in our DNA. The final question for these 100 souls is whether that ancient code still contains the strength, the luck, and the will to pass through the eye of the needle, one last, momentous time. In the end, what is the legacy of this new, fragile, and embattled humanity? What does the world look like, long, long after their desperate struggles are over? What does it truly mean for humanity to survive? Does it mean rebuilding the old world, with its towering cities, its global networks, and its insatiable appetite for energy? Or does it mean letting that world go and learning to live in a new and quieter one? Let us journey forward one last time, across thousands of years, into a distant future where the struggles of the last 100 are a dim and mythic memory. Humanity has survived, but it is a humanity transformed. Scattered across the continents are small towns and villages, nestled in river valleys and along coastlines, living in a deep and abiding balance with the natural world that surrounds them. They have technology, but it is a gentle and sustainable technology, born from the scraps of the old world and the wisdom of the new. Graceful windmills turn on the hilltops. Water wheels spin in the rivers. They are masters of recycling, reforging the rust-proof steel and melting the immortal glass of our time into new things of beauty and utility. They tell stories of the before times, of the giants who built the world and then vanished. These stories are their myths, their history, their most potent cautionary tales, warnings against the kind of hubris that could make the sky fall and the seas burn. At night, they look up at the sky, and they see the faint, perfect ring of our geostationary satellites. They do not know what they are, but they have a name for them. The ancestors' tears, a glittering, celestial reminder of a great and tragic loss, which fills them not with ambition, but with a quiet and profound humility. The planet they inhabit has found a new equilibrium. The atmosphere has long since stabilized. The oceans are clean and teeming with life. The great forests have matured, and the ecosystems are vibrant, complex, and resilient. Many species that were lost in the great extinction of our era are gone forever, their ghosts living on only in the stories passed down from the survivors. But life, in its endless creativity, has filled the gaps. Humanity is no longer a geological force, a planetary power. They are simply what they were always meant to be, another clever and interesting primate, living within the rules and rhythms of the wider ecosystem, a part of the whole, not its master. Some of the knowledge of the old world has survived, passed down through oral tradition and rediscovered in miraculously preserved books. They understand the fundamentals of medicine, of hygiene, of engineering and agriculture. But their scientific worldview is fundamentally different from ours. It is less concerned with dominating nature, with breaking it down into its smallest parts to be controlled, and more concerned with understanding it as a holistic, interconnected system to be harmonized with. They might study ecology, biology, and botany with a depth and an intuitive grace that we can barely imagine, because their lives, their health, and their happiness depend on it in the most direct and intimate way. In the end, what was lost and what was gained, gone, perhaps forever, are the symphonies of Beethoven, the vast interconnected library of the internet, the dream of walking on other worlds. But also, gone are the existential threats that haunted our time. Gone are the nuclear weapons. Gone is the threat of engineered global pandemics. Gone is the slow, grinding dread of a world that was consuming its own life support system. This new humanity might be poorer in data, but it is richer in meaning. It might be poorer in material possessions, but it is richer in community, in its connection to the cycles of the earth, and in its simple, daily appreciation for the profound and fragile miracle of being alive. Perhaps, then, the end of our civilization was not the end of humanity. Perhaps it was a metamorphosis, a painful, necessary shedding of a skin that had grown too heavy, too powerful, and too destructive. A return to a more sustainable, more humble, and perhaps a more human way of being. And so, our story ends, not with the bang of a great cataclysm, or even with the whimper of a lonely end, but with the gentle, hopeful sound of a quiet dawn, the song of a bird in a tree, and the soft, peaceful breath of a world that is, at long last, at peace. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the quiet. If these thoughts have given you a sense of peace or wonder, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. It allows our small community of quiet explorers to grow. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of the deep silence, the clear stars, and the resilient, pulsing heart of life. May your dreams be peaceful and your rest be deep. Good night.